I hope you're not too tired of transposing in the blues progression because we're continuing to the next level. The good news about this video is that an awful lot will be familiar. We won't have any new chord progressions, we won't learn any new chords, and by now we're pretty skilled at figuring out new keys. But that also means we've got some room to learn some new things that a beginner would find pretty confusing. Luckily for you, you're not a beginner anymore. So let's get started. The first step is to look at the next key in our sequence. We've gone from C to G to D, and now we need to go further. We know by now that we always start our new key with the fifth note of the previous key, and here it's no different. So let's take our D major scale and find note number 5, A. As before, we make A our first and last note, include all the notes from D major, including F sharp and C sharp, locate the 7th note and raise it, and like magic, we have an A major scale. And remembering our musical rules, we insert the Roman numerals, and look what we have. Can I do the dad joke? Not just a major key, but the key of A major. Sorry, I'm done. I want to point out a pattern that you might have already noticed. With C major, we had 0 sharps or flats. With G major, we had 1 sharp. With D, we had 2 sharps. And with A, do you see where I'm going with this? You don't even need to know what the next key would be to guess at how many sharps would be in that key. The major keys are connected to each other in mathematical and sonic ways. It's part of what makes music work. And while we're on that train of thought, we should ask ourselves, how are major and minor keys connected? Remember, I told you that they were, but I didn't really tell you how. And while I appreciate you taking me at my word on that, I know you want to know more. So let's recap some things. A major and A minor are parallels of each other. That makes sense on face value. And C major and A minor are relatives of each other. Okay, we'll go with that. But now that we know what an A major scale looks like, we can unlock this door with our new key. First off, the reason the following can make sense is because we know what some of these symbols and terms mean. Half step and whole step, how we describe the distance between notes when not talking about a specific key. Remember, 2 frets on the ukulele are a half step apart. And sharp. We've known for a while that sharps make notes sound higher, but we learned recently that they specifically make notes 1/2 step higher. And intervals, terms like the 3rd and the 5th. We know that this refers to where notes are in a scale, 3rd note, 5th note, etc. So back to our A major scale. We're going to turn this into an A minor scale. And how? We're going to flatten the 3rd, 6th, and 7th notes. Wait, what do I mean by flatten? Well, you've heard me casually refer to flats, but never really explained them. It's time to make a formal introduction. A flat does the opposite of what a sharp does. It lowers a note by a half step. Say we have a note like G. Adding a sharp would turn it into G sharp, and it would sound like this. But adding a flat would make it sound like this. If we can raise notes, then we can lower notes, and flats are how we do that. But, and I hate to repeat myself, there are more rules than just this. And the more rules I give you, the more confused you're going to get. So I'll keep this as simple and clear as I can, but make sure you pay attention. Flattening a note just means we're lowering it. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to write the flat symbol. What I mean by that is, we only write the flat symbol when we're starting with the normal note. If I say we're going to flatten G sharp, that note doesn't become G flat, it just becomes G. Does that make sense? If you need to go drink some water and lie down, I'll understand. When it comes to our A major scale, here's how we apply that. Remember that we need to flatten the 3rd, 6th, and 7th notes, and G sharp is note number 7. A flattened G sharp becomes G. Very good. So let's continue. F sharp is note number 6, and a flattened F sharp becomes just F, and C sharp is note number 3, and a flattened C sharp becomes C. This wasn't so hard after all, and we have just created an A minor scale. Well done, everyone. But wait. There's something very familiar about this scale. Something that was brought up all the way back when we first started labeling chords. Does the scale look like something else? It has no sharps or flats in it, just like another scale, C major. And ladies and gentlemen, this is how they are related. Much like the pop chord progression in its inverted darker half, these two are basically the same order of notes, but starting in different places. Alright everyone, take a second and let your brain absorb that. In the meantime, we're going to leave this alone for a minute and look at something else. But don't worry, we're coming back to it. Let's return to our basic blues form. 4 bars of 1, 4-4-1-1, and 5-4-1-1. Rewriting this in the key of A is a piece of cake. The 1s become A's, the 4s become D's, and 5 becomes E. Perfect so far. Now to play it. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe this wasn't the cake we were expecting. I said we weren't going to learn any new chords in this video, so what's the deal with E major? We don't know that one, and part of the reason I haven't taught you E is this. It's really not very comfortable to play, and I think we should avoid it. Does this ruin our plans for playing A blues? Of course not. We've got a hack, brought to us by the key of A minor and Beethoven. Remember how we used E7 in Für Elise? Remember why I said this was allowed? Because E was the 5th note of A minor, and a 7th chord is allowed if it's a 5 chord. Should we fact check this? We actually have the full A minor scale now, so we can do that. Yep, E is note number 5. What about an A major? Yep, it's note number 5 here too. We can swap out the uncomfortable E major chord for an E7 chord. Our A blues is saved. So before you ask, and to clarify, yes, this rule works with both major and minor keys. A 7 chord can save the day anytime it's a 5 chord. But did I ever get into why? Well, not only does the key of A give us an opportunity to learn how major and minor keys are connected, it gives us a chance to finally figure out what is going on with the strange E7 chord. So further down the rabbit hole we go. First, remember how your basic chord is built. Root, major 3rd, perfect 5th, or root, minor 3rd, perfect 5th. With the major and minor scale at our disposal, we can see this really clearly. On the major side, let's start with C, the root, then go to E. That's a major 3rd because it's the 3rd note of a major scale. Then we go to G, the perfect 5th. And of course we still do the skip note method, but getting to start at the root of the scale makes this a little simpler. Anyway, a C chord is spelled C-E-G, which we already knew. So let's move over to the minor side. Start with A, the root, skip a note up to C, which is the minor 3rd in this scale, and then to the perfect 5th, E. A minor is spelled A-C-E. Again, something that we already knew. So now for something we don't know. What happens if we skip a note one more time and add a 4th note to our chords? If we started on 1, skipped up to 3, and then up to 5, the next place to skip up to is 7. On the major side, that means we would add a B to our C chord, and on the minor side, we would add a G to our A minor chord. And in doing so, these have now been changed to 7th chords. 7th chords have a unique sound that's used in jazz and soul music a lot. The C chord we just built is called a C major 7 chord and sounds like this. Cool, right? And the minor chord we just built is called an A minor 7 chord, and you actually get that one by just strumming all of the open strings. But here's the catch, and you knew there had to be one. Neither of these is quite what E7 is. Let me explain. Just like we call the 3rd note from our scales a major or minor 3rd, depending on where we find it, we do the same for the 7th note. In our C scale, that B would be called a major 7th, and in A minor, the G would be a minor 7th. And here's where knowing what half and whole steps are really helps. A major 7th interval is a half step underneath the root note, and a minor 7th is a whole step underneath the root note. Now, for this next part, we just need our C major scale. We're going to find naturally occurring 7th chords with our skip a note method, the same way we can find basic chords. If we start on D, for instance, we get D, F, A, a D minor chord, and C, which is a whole step under D, so it's minor. Same for E, E, G, B, and D. E is a minor chord, and D is a whole step under E, so it's a minor 7th. On the major side, this works for the 4 chord, F. F, A, C, and an E, which is a half step under F, so it's a major 7th. So far, our major and minor 7ths match with our major and minor chords, except for here, the 5 chord. We can skip a note with G and get G, B, D, which we know is a G major chord, but then we hit F. That's a whole step underneath G. It's a minor 7th. So now we've got a problem. We've got a mismatch, a major chord with a minor 7th. Is that the same for E7? Let's figure out how it's spelled. On the ukulele, the voicing for E7 is G sharp, D, E, and B. Is this also a major-minor mix-up? Since E is the 5 in A major, E7 should naturally occur here if that's true. Let's check. We apply our skip-a-note method and get E, G sharp, B, an E major chord. Then we skip up to D, which is a whole step below E and a minor 7th. So E7 does fit in as a 5 chord. And check this out. If we change to A minor, every note only moves a single half or whole step, and the same applies to A major. We can see another reason why these chords sound nice together. But believe it or not, these types of chords weren't used very often as the rules for Western classical music were being laid down. People considered these chords to be dissonant or wrong sounding. But the 5 chord got a pass. It was considered second only to the 1 chord in importance, and they called it the dominant chord, and composers were adding minor 7ths to it as early as the 1600s. These became known as dominant 7 chords. So here's the next question. Why is the chord referred to as just E7, with no major or minor indicator? Since it was mostly dominant chords that composers added the 7th to, there wasn't any real need to distinguish any other types. Everyone assumed it meant major chord plus minor 7th. So as music evolved and genres like jazz used more adventurous sounding harmonies, people replaced a Roman numeral 5 with letters, and by default a chord with a 7 came to mean a dominant 7 chord, regardless of whether it was the 5 of that particular key or not. Specifically saying something was a C major 7 or an A minor 7 came later. But it wasn't completely abandoned, as a major minor 7th chord still works best when it's the 5. Hence, why we are able to use E7 in the key of A instead of plain old E. And now that all of that is settled, let's get back to playing our new blues progression in the key of A. Half note strums to ease us into this. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1. Very good, everyone. So now, as is required by law, let's mess with it and add variations. The first thing we're going to do is easy. Just like with How Blue Can You Get, we'll go back and swap out our second measure for a 4 chord and our last measure for a 5, or rather 5-7 chord. And that means those chords will be D and E7. Easy enough. But let's add a little more. How about revisiting the idea of syncopation and ties? We'll start with this, 4 eighth notes and 2 quarter notes. And remember, we're going to swing this a little, so it will sound like T, 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 ta, ta. But it's not syncopated until we add this, a tie between this eighth note and this quarter note. This combines these notes together and makes a longer sound. T, 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 ta, ta. But the rhythm is still pretty easy since it starts right on beat 1, and we also play right on beat 4. So how should we strum it? One option is to go down, up, down, up, down. And I think we should go with that. We don't often use the up strum for longer notes, but a different approach is good for us. However, we can add a little more to keep this a little more interesting. Let's add some staccato markings and chuck strums here and here. And do you notice something? These chuck strums are right on beats 2 and 4, so in addition to playing chords, we've also got some percussion effects added in. Very nice. How about these other strums? Let's keep these up strums like we discussed, but let's change the first beat specifically to thumb. Technically, it's still a downstrum, but the thumb gives it an extra cool sound. Slowly, it looks like this. Let's try that with the whole blues progression. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and T, 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 ta, ta, 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 T, T, Very nice, everyone. So now that we've got this in our hands, let's attach it to a song. We're going to keep this simple, something where we can just play the strum pattern in key of A blues the entire time, but also something that will keep our interest. And I think I have something for us. We'll just have to go back in time a little and revisit Chess Records. By now, we're pretty familiar with this record company, which was the blues record label in Chicago from 1950 until the mid-1980s, when they were acquired by MCA. But in 1951, they had a prolific songwriter working for them, Mississippi native Willie Dixon. Dixon wrote over 500 songs during his lifetime, many of which became blues standards and several of which were originally recorded by Chess artists, including Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Muddy Waters, and Chester Howlin' Wolf Burnett. In fact, as an interesting side note, Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters had a professional rivalry that lasted through much of the 50s and 60s. Dixon would sometimes pretend he had written a song for one of them, so the other would want to record it. Pretty smart. In 1961, Dixon wrote a song called The Red Rooster, and it was first recorded by Howlin' Wolf. It was one of the only songs Wolf played slide guitar on during the 1960s, and Dixon also played bass on the record. It was not a hit at the time, but it gained popularity by being included on his 1962 Howlin' Wolf album, and other artists started to record it, including a fellow Mississippi native the next year. Samuel Cooke was born in Clarksdale, Mississippi in 1931, and his family moved to Chicago in 1933. The son of a minister, Cooke sang in several gospel groups as a teenager while he attended Wendell Phillips Academy High School, the same high school Nat King Cole attended. He joined the Highway QCs at age 14 in 1945, and then the Soul Stirrers at age 19 in 1951. In 1956, Cooke recorded Lovable, a remake of the gospel song Wonderful and his first secular single. Though he recorded the song under the alias Dale Cooke so as not to upset his gospel fans, his voice was too recognizable to hide. But reaction to the single was positive, and Cooke's shift to secular music was even supported by his minister father. From that point on, he began to spell his last name with an extra E to indicate a new chapter in his life, and went by the professional name of Sam Cooke. Over his career, Cooke became regarded as the king of soul, bringing the music into the mainstream and influencing artists like Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder. He had 29 top 40 singles from 1957 until his tragic passing in 1964, and, being close friends with Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, was also a central figure in the civil rights movement, using his popularity with white and black audiences to promote understanding and equality. In 1963, Cooke included the Red Rooster on his album Night Beat, changing its title to Little Red Rooster, and the song reached number 7 on Billboard's R&B singles chart and number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Though Cooke and Howlin' Wolf made distinct versions of the song, both of their recordings helped bring the song, and blues in general, overseas to England, where young British bands were trying to emulate the sound of America. One band in particular, the Rolling Stones, actually made their own version of Little Red Rooster and frequently performed it. And another band started making blues the foundation of their music as they began changing the rock genre into something else. But we'll get to that soon. For now, it's our turn to add some ukulele to this song. We've gone over the blues form it uses, so we're pretty much good to go. Wait 4 measures to come in, and then repeat the progression 5 times. The only change is that you play the very last measure of the song as A instead of E7. Other than that, try to stay with the strum pattern, do your best to keep up, and let's see if we can hang with Mr. Sam Cooke. Ready?
send him home. Said if you see my red rooster, send him home. I ain't had no peace in the barnyard since my red rooster been gone.
Very good, everyone. Hopefully that strum pattern wasn't too hard and you're doing okay. Remember, you can always go back and play the song again, but I have confidence that you're ready to move on. In exchange for having a more difficult strum pattern in the last song, I think it's okay for us to go back to something simpler. We'll also go back to our basic blues pattern as well, but we don't want to get too simple and bore ourselves, so for this we're going to bring back our down-up eighth note strumming for the entire thing. It will take a little bit of work to build up our endurance so this is comfortable, but you have the basic idea. And to help yourself stay in time and not sound too sloppy, try adding an accent on every down strum, like this. That will help keep the groove of the song going. So with this much strumming, it's only fair that you get a break somewhere, like a swimmer taking a breath. So we'll include that right here. We're going to have a single quarter note of our 4 chord, D, and then 3 beats of rest. It might not seem like a lot, but it gets repeated, so don't worry. Now that we have that, let's try all of this together. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1. Very nice. Other than trying to keep up with the eighth notes, this is actually pretty easy. So I don't see any harm in throwing in another little challenge. Let's take our 12 bars and change the length again to 6-bar blues, which, if you're doing the math in your head, is exactly what it sounds like. We're going to play through this twice as fast. But before you panic, understand that we're not going to speed up our strumming. As we often do, we're just going to change the speed at which we switch chords by essentially cutting everything in half. 4 bars of A? How about 2 bars of A? 2 bars of D and then 2 bars of A? Not hardly. 1 bar of each. And a separate measure for both our E7 and D chords? Who do they think they are? E7 gets to share a room again, this time with D and with no break. And we end with 1 bar of A. We're going to do this, but remember that your strumming isn't any faster, only the changes. So let's try this half version together. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Good work, everyone. So, with this full and half version of the blues, we've got everything we need for our next song. And what is that going to be? Well, if you recall, I mentioned earlier how in the 60s, British bands were being inspired and influenced by American blues. The Rolling Stones even recorded their own version of the song we just played, Little Red Rooster. But there was a trend that started emerging around this time of taking the blues, turning up the volume, and transforming rock music into something that sounded heavier. To learn about this, we've got to go meet a band called the Yardbirds. You probably haven't heard of the Yardbirds, but they were popular. Formed in 1963, they were playing the same blues rock genre as many British bands were, but they stood out because of their guitar players. First, a guitar player who would eventually form the legendary rock band Cream started playing with them, Eric Clapton. After his departure in 1965, a prominent studio guitar player named Jeff Beck joined the group, a guitarist that Rolling Stone magazine would later rate in the top 5 of greatest rock guitarists of all time. And before leaving in 1967, Beck got his friend and fellow studio musician Jimmy Page to join the group. and then the Yardbirds broke up. The end. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm just kidding. Sort of. The Yardbirds were in the process of breaking up around this time, but they had a problem. They still had several performance obligations scheduled in Scandinavia that they needed to fulfill. Page didn't want to cancel these dates, so he started working on putting together a new band with Yardbirds bandmate Chris Dreja, calling it the New Yardbirds. In search of more members, it was suggested that a singer named Robert Plant would be a good fit for the group, and Plant in turn recommended his childhood friend John Bonham to play drums. As the band was coming together, Dreja suddenly quit to pursue a career as a rock photographer, and Page recruited another studio musician he was friends with, John Paul Jones, to step in as the bass player. The lineup was complete, but the name wasn't. And this was because they weren't allowed, for legal reasons, to use the name the New Yardbirds after the Scandinavia concerts were done. And this is when Page remembered a funny thing a friend had said. In 1966, Jeff Beck had recorded a side project song called Beck's Bolero, putting together a supergroup of sorts, with Jimmy Page also on guitar and Keith Moon from fellow English band The Who on drums. Moon and Who bassist John Entwistle joked about keeping the group together as an actual band. Moon said, "Yeah, that'll go down like a lead balloon," to which Entwistle replied, "More like a Led Zeppelin," which was a type of airship. Stylizing lead as lead, the new group of Page, Plant, Jones, and Bonham had their name, Led Zeppelin. Lasting from 1968 until 1980, Led Zeppelin's particular take on blues, rock, and folk music introduced a heavier and louder sound to all three genres, creating something new. Along with British bands Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, the music was a clear evolution from the rock and roll of Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry, and was given a new name, heavy metal. In 1971, Led Zeppelin released an untitled album commonly known as Led Zeppelin 4, as their previous two albums were numbered as 2 and 3. It received critical acclaim and continues to be regarded as one of their best albums, producing the song they would become most famous for, Stairway to Heaven. But there wasn't a single weak song on the album, and the one we're going to attach our new chart to is a powerhouse blues rock song and a John Bonham drum showcase, Rock and Roll. Like with Little Red Rooster, we mostly know what we need to know to play this song. But let's examine how it switches between our full blues progression and our half blues progression. In the very beginning, wait about 4.5 measures through the drum introduction. It's a little uneven, so just try and come in with me. Then start with the half version, but the first time around, E7 gets to measure all to itself. Then play the full version twice for verses 1 and 2. After that, switch back to the half version for the beginning of the guitar solo, and that's it for half. Go through the full progression twice more for the guitar solo in verse 3, and then one more time for verse 4. But when you get to that break on the D chord, stop. Right here, we have a classic John Bonham mini solo serving as our coda. When it's done, hit that A chord one final time. Don't bother counting during the drum solo, just listen. It's pretty obvious when to come in, but you might need to try it a few times. Now, just like with How Blue Can You Get, you'll notice that I only wrote the Roman numerals in the workbook number 2 chart. Take a second and write the chords in. Just a little practice in transferring numbers into letters. No problem for you. Also, if you want an extra challenge, you can try strumming this with 16th notes. But that's only if you want to. For this video, I'll stick to using 8th notes. Alright everyone, let's do this. It's time to hang with the mighty Led Zeppelin.
It's been a long time since I rock and roll.
Well done, everyone. Practice that song as much as you need to, and when you're ready, it's time to move on to a brand new chord. In the next video, we will be learning the chord that will open up the pop chord progression in the key of D for us, the B minor chord. This will also be special because it will be our first bar chord. What do I mean by that? You'll have to find out. Plus, we've got two great songs to take a look at. The first is by a singer and piano player who's led the way for a new generation of R&B artists, and an Irish band that left Dublin to dominate America in the 1980s. All for next time. All right, see you everyone.